On the morning of August 17, 1943, the United States 8th Air Force made a mathematical decision that essentially signed the death warrants of over 600 American airmen. The plan was supposed to be a devastating, two-pronged hammer blow against the Third Reich. Two massive armadas of B-17 flying fortresses would take off from England simultaneously. The first armada would bomb the fighter plane factories in Regensburg. The second armada would bomb the crucial ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt. By attacking two distant targets at the exact same time, the Americans planned to glitch the German air defense network, forcing the Luftwaffe to split their fighter squadrons, making them too weak to stop the bombers. It was a brilliant plan, but the English weather had other ideas. A thick, suffocating fog rolled across the British air bases, delaying the Schweinfurt force. But the Regensburg force, commanded by the legendary and ruthless Colonel Curtis LeMay, couldn't wait. If they delayed, they wouldn't have enough daylight to complete their radical, secret escape route. So, due to a fatal miscommunication and the brutal reality of the ticking clock, the Regensburg force took off alone. They flew straight into the meat grinder, completely unescorted, knowing full well that they were about to face the entire, undivided fury of the German Luftwaffe. This is the story of the Schweinfurt-Regensburg Mission, the day the daylight bombing strategy almost broke, and the terrifying reality of fighting a war at 25,000 feet. To understand why this mission was so suicidal, you have to understand the Escort Flaw of 1943. The Allies believed in the self-defending bomber formation. They believed that if you stacked enough B-17 tightly together, their hundreds of .50 caliber machine guns would create an impenetrable wall of lead. They had to believe this because in 1943, neither the British nor the Americans had a fighter plane with fuel tanks large enough to escort the bombers all the way to Germany and back. The American P-47 Thunderbolt escorts could only fly to the German border. After 20 minutes, they hit bingo fuel and had to turn around, leaving the bombers completely alone over enemy territory. As one guilt-ridden P-47 pilot remembered, "I don't think there is a fighter pilot in England who wouldn't be overjoyed to have the capability to escort the bombers to their targets. We learned not to like it, but to live with it." As soon as the P-47s turned back, the slaughter began. Because the Schweinfurt force was delayed by the fog, the Luftwaffe didn't have to split its forces. They sent every single available fighter in the region, over 300 aircraft, directly at Curtis LeMay's solitary Regensburg armada. The German fighter pilots had figured out the B-17's fatal weakness. The flying fortress had overlapping machine gun fire, primarily facing the rear. The nose of the bomber was relatively unprotected. The German Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s climbed high into the blinding sun, lined up, and executed terrifying head-on attacks. They screamed directly at the cockpits of the bombers at a combined closing speed of over 500 miles per hour, unleashing 2-second bursts of explosive 20mm cannon fire. The sky turned into an absolute apocalypse. One American navigator later recalled the sheer intimacy of the terror. Some of the 109s came so close that I could see the expression on the pilot's face. I still shudder when I recall the big black crosses on the wings. I couldn't help but think they were just as crazy as we were, to fly into a formation that had 250 heavy machine guns pointed at them. But the German tactic worked. The bombers were getting shredded. The 100th Bomb Group, flying in the lowest and most vulnerable position of the formation, took such catastrophic casualties that day, and in the weeks that followed, that they earned a grim, permanent nickname, the Bloody Hundredth. Despite losing 14 heavy bombers, the surviving Regensburg force pushed through the flak, dropped their altitude to a dangerous 18,000 feet, and successfully smashed the Messerschmitt fighter factories. But instead of turning around and flying back through the gauntlet of German fighters to England, LeMay executed the cheat code of the mission. The Regensburg bombers turned south, flew over the Alps, and kept flying across the Mediterranean to land at Allied bases in North Africa. It was a brilliant tactical maneuver that completely confused the German fighters waiting to ambush them on the way home. But the delay in England had created a secondary disaster. Hours later, the fog in England finally cleared, and the 222 bombers of the Schweinfurt force took off. The American commanders prayed that the Luftwaffe fighters were still chasing the Regensburg force, or were grounded, out of fuel and ammunition. They were catastrophically wrong. Because of the massive delay, the German fighters that had attacked the Regensburg force had plenty of time to land, refuel, rearm, and take off again. Furthermore, the Luftwaffe had used the extra time to call in reserve fighter squadrons from all across Germany. When the Schweinfurt force crossed the border and their fighter escorts turned for home, they didn't just face the Luftwaffe, they faced the largest German fighter force ever assembled to attack an American bomber formation. It was a massacre. A co-pilot in the leading group later said, "There wasn't much sense in calling out fighters. Everything was coming from 12 o'clock level for what seemed like an eternity. Each time they came in, you thought that one of those times, it would be our turn to get it." Another airman recalled looking out his window and seeing what looked like flares burning on the ground, guiding them to the target. They weren't flares. They were the burning wreckage of dozens of American B-17. The sky was so thick with men bailing out of exploding bombers that it looked like a massive paratrooper invasion. The Schweinfurt force reached their target, but the bombing was highly inaccurate due to smoke screens and fierce anti-aircraft fire. They dropped their bombs, turned around, and had to fly back through the exact same meat grinder to get home. When the sun set on August 17, 1943, the 8th Air Force counted the cost of the hammer blow. It was a strategic and human disaster. 60 fully loaded B-17 bombers were completely destroyed. Over 600 American airmen were killed or captured in a single day. Another 100 bombers were heavily damaged. It was a staggering 16% loss rate, a completely unsustainable number. If they kept losing planes at that rate, the entire 8th Air Force would cease to exist in a matter of weeks. The Regensburg raid successfully delayed German fighter production by a few weeks, but the Schweinfurt raid was a total failure. German ball-bearing production actually increased the following month. The American bomber crews claimed to have shot down 288 German fighters. The brutal reality, discovered after the war, was that they had only destroyed 21. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission proved a terrifying truth to the Allied High Command. The self-defending bomber was a myth. You could not fly heavy bombers deep into Germany during daylight without fighter escorts. The cost in human life was simply too high. The daylight bombing campaign was nearly halted until the arrival of the ultimate system fix, the P-51 Mustang, a fighter that finally had the fuel tanks to fly to Germany, stay with the bombers, and turn the hunters into the hunted. But for the men who flew on August 17th, there was no Mustang. There was only the freezing cold, the terrifying roar of German cannons, and the brutal arithmetic of a war that demanded they fly into the fire, no matter the cost. If the brutal reality of the Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission changed how you view the air war in World War II, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that the unpolished, gritty history of the men who fought at 25,000 feet deserves to be heard. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into the archives. What do you think? Was the daylight bombing strategy fundamentally flawed, or was it a necessary sacrifice to break the Third Reich? Let us know in the comments below.